Thank you for joining me right after your lunch. It's always best to have a presentation after lunch. I think everybody still has their energy. So maybe just to start by show of hands, who in this room manufacturer is nuts? Okay, so just grow up. What are you guys doing here? Heavy duty automotive, the OEM. In sewer OEM. In sewer OEM. Fire trucks OEM. Forklifts OEM. Anybody else? Machinery OEM. Anyone else? And anyone else? Okay, I love that we have OEMs in this room because quoting is not only a problem or a challenge for wire harness manufacturers. And I think that the more of the with this, the better off the industry will be. So we're giving a talk about breaking the manual quoting bottleneck, and sometimes quoting feels like breaking your neck. So hopefully we're here. And just to start, I am not a software vendor that's just here to pitch you a product. I'm a guy that owned and ran a contract harness manufacturing shop for 35 years. I sold my company to Aptiv in wish I had when I was a manufacturer. And what I'm going to share with you today is the playbook that I wish I had when I owned my own business. So, as I said, I've spent 35 years at a company called Alcom Systems. We were a wire harness manufacturer, primarily for aerospace. I am also a board member of WEMA and co-chair of the WEMA IAT, the Innovation Advisory Team under WEMA. And I'm the founder of Cable Tech and CEO of Cable Tech. And so the data that I will be talking about today, it comes from three places. First is my own experience and what I saw in my time at Telcom. Second is the IAT, the organization. The WEM organization that is sort of advancing innovation. We did a survey last year of 42 manufacturers, and we're pulling out this data. Some of you have seen it already. And then it's not a theory, it's real. And so when I cite a number, it will be from one of those resources. It's not going to be perfect, but it's the best data that we've been able to get. So and the numbers, they're not subtle. 3 out of 4 shops describe their own quoting as being manual, time intensive, and too slow. And this is their words, it's not mine. More than half of them admit that they depend on tribal knowledge, specifically in their quote process. And then the scary part, around 2/3 of the people quoting in this room, is anybody not quoting in Excel? Can you throw out what you use for query? Custom built?
Our ERP system has a quoting mark.
ERP system, yes.
Yeah.
Custom built. Okay, so 3 people here are using custom builds or an ERP, and the rest are coding in Excel. Um, a great majority find design errors after coding, 83% by design errors after coding. We 83% by design errors after coding. We benchmark coding time and code turnaround time. So the average code touch time on a fairly simple quote is 5 hours, meaning 5 hours of your engineer and supply chain time. That's for hours of your engineer and supply chain time. That's for simple build. There were some automotive OEMs, skier or off-road systems. Know that it could be 20, 30, 40 hours to code a single harness. And then the average turnaround time for a quote is 2 to 3 weeks. 2 to 3 weeks just to respond to an RFQ in 2026. That's that. So coding really isn't just a workflow problem. It's also a P&L problem. It affects everyone's bottom line. In revenue, when you take 2 weeks to quote, but the customer needs it in 2 days, and somebody gets the quote in 2 days, the order goes to whoever quoted it first, not whoever quoted it best. So you could have spent 2 weeks on something and had a great result. However, it took too long and you lost the opportunity. Right? That's not money, that's not an investment. That's a waste. You've got tribal knowledge. In my former company, on large bids, I often gave the same quote package to 3 or 4 different engineers because I was frankly nervous about bidding incorrectly. And guess what? I would get 3 or 4 different quotes. And then I'd have to figure out whom do I trust. Because it's really not a democratic process, right? And then we've got a talent problem. We've got our best people. And then we've got a talent problem. We've got our best people, our best engineers, those tribal knowledge guys. They know everything about the plants. They know everything about the customer, right? They know who needs what and what's not stated on their drawings. They know what on the right parts for a certain customer. On their drawings, they know what on the right parts for a certain customer. What do? They're spending their time chasing missing parts, looking for specs, finding an alternate. That's a hiring problem. This guy's kicker is that 76%, again, this is not my data, 76% of manufacturers find design errors after they've won the job. So you bid it one way, and then you discover that you bid it wrong. Okay, so the bottleneck there doesn't just slow down the sales process, it guarantees a production loss, because if the product stuck in production, it costs you money. And if you've got to buy new parts and scrap others, it costs you money. Sure, maybe you can transfer some of that costs you money. Sure, maybe you can transfer some of that cost to your customer, but that's not a fun negotiation, right? Earlier this year, I attended the WEMA annual conference. Was anybody here? Only one person? Yes, Cameron. Any more? Only a couple people. It's a great conference to attend, by the way. And so we asked the question, and I'm going to ask you now. How many of you have your most expensive into Excel just to get a quote out. Can you raise your hand if you've got your top engineers just data entering a lot around quotes? Okay, over half the people in the room. And we call this being data archaeologists, right? They're digging through the artifacts of the PDF, they're digging information on the part, only to reconstruct what the customer wants that he didn't tell you in the beginning or the data that you don't have. And so is that really a sustainable business model in 2026 when we've got so many tools and we've got to operate so quickly? So we know that OEMs send incomplete PDFs to you. They're missing information, terminal seals plugs, they're missing, for those OEMs in the room, you're missing terminal seals and plugs in your design. You don't tell us what are the right wire lengths or the coverings. Okay? It's really hard work, and sometimes we don't get it right. And engineers, they have to spend a lot of time looking at that data just on the quote. They should be spending the time on the manufacturing floor, figuring out how to build it faster, how to build it better, how to automate, how to build it better, how to automate. And then, of course, when the manufacturers find a problem, they can't make a decision on their own, right? They got to flag a problem. They got to go to the OEM engineer. They got to get approval. That all takes a lot of time and costs for both entities. Takes a lot of time and costs for both entities. So the IT, right, the Innovation Advisory Committee identified 4 root causes for this. And these are compounding causes. The complete customer clients. 57% say this is their single biggest blocker. My former business at Elcom, I probably had around $10 million on hold at any given time, $10 million on hold, waste instructions. And those were typically issues related to the customer design, right? That's a lot of money, a lot of working capital, a lot of unplanned production that we had to absorb. Of course, what that means is we're missing parts, we're missing seals, we didn't have the right material in stock. We will email the customer. 3 days are passing. By the time we get the information, this whole thing starts drifting. And it's not, guys, the tools that you use don't make it easy for you. And we'll come back to that in strategy 4. Then the second problem is the way data is exchanged between the OEMs and their suppliers. Of the data exchanged is in PDFs. Okay? 2026, 90% of the technical data being exchanged between OEMs and manufacturers on something as complex as wire harnesses is in PDFs. Wire harnesses is in PDFs. What are you guys supposed to do with that, right? The data, the original data exists usually, okay? It was created in CAD. Yes, I know some people created on a napkin. Some people created on a napkin. Some created on Visio. But typically, OEMs, larger ones, more sophisticated ones, do have CAD tools available to them. And it's digital data and has a lot of value. But you choose not to give it that way to your suppliers. You choose to print screen, run it to PDF, and send that data so that they can recreate this data when they get it. And so what happens with the manufacturers? They go over that drawing and they retype every line by hand. Most don't use any kind of tools. The OCRs sometimes work, sometimes doesn't work, especially on large drawings. They're not really effective. And so they're retyping all this data. Not only is that Not only is that inefficient, it often leads to mistakes. So really, for everyone, both OEMs and manufacturers, if we can fix one thing this year, the ideal thing to fix is how we get the right data to the manufacturers. Like, let's solve the PDF problem. And we'll cover that in strategy 2. The problem number 3, root cause number 3, is really the challenge of data. But it's also, of course, technical data. In a typical quote, when we look at a 50 line item bill of material, that's not huge. It's a medium-sized build. In a typical quote, we can have over 1,000 options of where to buy the materials or what are the right materials to buy. Often wires aren't specified by a manufacturing part number, they're specified by a spec. I can buy a different wire from IWC and a different wire from AWC, and it should meet the spec, right? But there's all these wire from AWC, and it should meet the spec, right? But there's all these different combinations. Let's not talk about colors. And then same thing with terminals. And even if it's the same part, there's so many different suppliers. And then we've got to deal with quantity options. So you get an RFQ and they want you to quote 5, 25, 50, 100, 250, right? Oh, it should be really easy. But it could be that a 5 I'm buying, that's a lot of data to one get. How do you get all this data? Of course, most of it's done pretty manually. And then even if you've got an amazing sourcing team and they get you data from all of the supplier, they've got to put that back into their system coding system. And that's got to figure out what's the right combination. It could be price, it could be delivery, it could be the people we like to do business with versus others. So really, how is it possible? How can you expect the quoting person to make the optimal decision, within a reasonable time frame? And you know what typically happens, right? I had a quoting team. Many of you have quoting teams, and they're really experienced people, and they've done it for a long time, and we trust that. But you can't make a decision across so much data. So often the first person that replies, just like when you reply to your customers, the first supplier that replies is who gets on the costing sheet. And that might not be the best supplier costing sheet. That might be a reason you lose the business because you didn't know that the material is available in 2 weeks, or you use the $3 component when your competitor knows to buy for $1.50. We see this happening every day. And then root cause number 4, and this should be one that keeps all of you up at night, is that tribal knowledge. Again, 57% of the responders said quoting depends entirely on a small group of their engineers and sourcing people. And to onboard a new engineer takes 6 to 12 months. And that's a junior person. Like, they don't know everything about your business. And they don't know everything about your business in 6 to 12 months. But just to get an average person in the door that stays in the door and that can do some meaningful work takes 6 to 12 months. So what happens when your best estimator goes on vacation? Still able to quote? And typically the answer is, yeah, of course, we are going to manage because we have to quote. But is it the same level of quality? Is it the same level of understanding? Or are you understanding, or are you, some of you, as the business owner, staying over the weekend to do those quotes because nobody else is available to do it? So that's a single point of failure on your entire revenue stream. The quoting is the gateway to the customers, right? To the customers, right? It's what drives your new revenue. And it's hinges on a very few amount of people in the business. And of course, those estimators that are experienced, some of you are in this room, at some point or go to a funner job, right? And it's really hard to start up again. It feels like, building the business all over. It's quite painful. So this is a huge point of failure this is a huge point of failure that should be alarming to everyone. And of course, those four causes that I mentioned, they compound. We see that we believe 2 hours is what a quote should take. That say 5-hour quote, it can be done in 2 hours. And I've got this for you. It can be done in less than 1 hour. And I'm talking about that 5-hour quote with 50 circuits, not the 300 circuit quote. That 2 to 3 weeks is what the industry average is from RFQ to delivery of a quote. Is anybody here turning quotes around consistently in less than 5 days? Consistently. Consistently. 1, 2. Are you doing it in less than 3? Keep your 2 people here under 5 days. Are you doing it in less than 3 days? Yes. Are you doing it in 1 day? Yeah, sometimes less. Sometimes in 1 day. Yeah, sometimes less. Sometimes. How many quotes do you process in a month? 15, 20. 15, 20. How many do you process? Yeah, and around there. 15, 20. So if you're boarding 15, 20, you can do it quickly. How many? 15, 20. So if you're boarding 15, 20, you can do it quickly. How many people here quote more than 100 quotes a month? Right there. No, none of you quote more than 100. 100 quotes, 100 assemblies, unique assemblies a month. Okay, we've got some more heads, right? Our company, we quoted more than 1,000 unique assemblies a month. So that volume, process and make those decisions certainly compounds. So, what do we do about it? We're going to talk about 4 proven strategies, and none of these require buying new people. Okay? So we're not asking you to hire new people to solve this problem. And we can problem, and we can improve on the challenge. So first, pull the data out of the PDF. Stop retyping. In fact, it's almost like they've got the keyboard, you're going to type. And so we are fortunate to live in a time where OCR has improved, and more recently, what we call AI-driven extraction, where we can read the customer drawings the same way that an experienced estimator would. And this is really important. It's not just reading the drawing, it's reading it in the same way that an experienced human estimator would, which means, of course, looking at the BOM table, but also looking at the connector tables that are all over the drawing, looking at the wire lists, the from-to lists, identifying the revisions, looking at the notes, and also identifying what we don't, and also identifying what we don't know. We know the wire color and we know the wire gauge, but they didn't tell us if it's TXL or GXL. That's a question. Happens quite often. So identifying what we don't know, using the tool work in the same way that a human would. Ideally, being able to flag things that are missing, like those missing terminals, missing seals or accessories, even before the engineer has to open the files. Standards that one customer has over another that tell you that you need a certain tape when we're using this particular connector, or lacing ties over cable ties. Like all this information that it lives in the hands of the few people that can be codified, into a tool that interprets the drawings similarly to what the human engineer would. I want to caution here because it's not going to be perfect. And we certainly know we spend a lot of time benchmarking data, and we certainly know that it's not perfect. And so we should, I'm not saying here that the AI is going to replace the people doing the work. What I'm saying is we use the AI to be that data archaeologist, right? We use the AI to do the heavy lift. Engineer needs to stay in control. The important thing is that the engineer now has time to ensure that they're focusing on the right things so that the errors that we catch aren't found on the production. They're resolved well before, ideally well before repo. So next is the tribal knowledge, right? I already mentioned there's a lot of tribal knowledge. There's a lot of tribal knowledge that goes into drawings. First is this particular customer wants things done one way, another customer wants it done another way, right? These certain things are missing from the customer drawing, and this particular customer specifies them another way. One of my customers would identify the coverings, the shrink sleeve and expando, and they would just call it XX. You guys seen the XX cup me? Whatever fits, right? So think about a situation. In certain industries, it's not a big deal. In aerospace, it's really hard. We were using fire sleeve. Fire sleeve had a 12-week lead time and cost something like $10 a foot. And then you always have to have it the smallest that fits. It's not really whatever fits. It's the smallest size that fits. So invariably, we don't have the right one in stock. We have one artist has 12 different sizes. One artist has 12 different sizes. That's the tribal knowledge. And then ideally we can get to DFN tools, validation tools at the coding stage. The back shell does not fit the connector. That happened quite a lot in my former business. And finally, there are material rules. There's logic to the materials being selected, but the OEM doesn't always apply that logic. And, there's a few OEMs here. It's not the same guy designing all of the harnesses for the specific platform or what you're quoting. It could be 3 or 4 guys that were using 2 or 3 different CAD tools or libraries to quote, to design. And that's where you got to quote. So we can apply certain logic to the materials that helps to optimize that. And that makes a real impact. Strategy 3, whatever you invest in the quoting side helps you prevent fighting it in production. And this is a really challenging balance because when you quote, you're always under rush to quote, right? They want it as quickly as possible. We already said it takes 2 to 3 weeks. Some of your competitors can do it faster. There's an incumbent supplier and he has the quote in already. And you try, your salesperson would be working for 6 months to get an opportunity from this customer. Finally, they say, here you go. That incumbent supplier, finally, they say, here you go. That incumbent supplier quotes it in a day, and the buyer's like, hey, your company is no good thing. You promised me you're going to do a great job, but I'll be waiting 10 days. I didn't get the quote. Right? So you're under huge pressure to quote quickly. Right? So you're under huge pressure to quote quickly. You don't win everything you quote. Most people don't win even half of what they quote. The industry averages 20%. So 20% of what you quote, you win, which means we spend, the more money we're losing. But on the other end, if we don't find certain things in the quote and we win that 20%, or maybe we're better, we're winning more, we're probably not going to find it in the contract review. Should always find it. Sometimes they don't mix it into the end product, and that's a real problem. But assuming in many cases the floor finds it, we got changes, we got retrofits, we got remarks, we got new materials, we got internal work order changes, we got remarks, we got new materials, we got internal work order changes, we got to get procurement to realign. That's a huge cascading effect. So what you find on the front end is a value. And in my experience, when we identify things in the front end and our customers learn that they can trust us to find their gaps, they gave us more business, right? We became not just a commoditized part supplier that's competing on price. They wanted to give us the work. And of course, the real problem is nobody measures anything. The real problem is nobody measures anything. We might measure the efficiency on the floor to some extent, but we don't measure that front end of the process. And so before you fix anything, you've got to measure it. And I can't tell you anything, you've got to measure it. And I can't tell you how many conversations we have with companies and we say, how many assemblies do you quote? And they go, we don't know. And we ask him, when is the turnaround time? They typically say it's about 2 to 3 weeks. But no, what is it? Is it 2 weeks? Is it 3 weeks? How much time you spend on quoting? Almost nobody has that data. And this is the front end of your business with your most precious, costly, and knowledgeable people, and it's not measured. So we certainly recommend you're measuring both how long it takes you to deliver and how much time people spend on a product. The same thing should be with any key processes and certainly with quoting. And then if you have those measurements, we're happy to share what industry benchmark looks like. So again, the IAT, we are capturing this data. We've got multiple members in the group that are contributing to this data. They're very large wire harness manufacturers to really small, and we're benchmarking this data. And then we as Cable Tech are certainly benchmarking this data with our customers in our system in a more automated way. So we can certainly provide anonymized industry. Are you doing better? I mean, a couple of companies said I can do quotes in one day. So you're doing better or worse than your peers, and how much time is that taking you? And I just want to emphasize, we can't fix a problem unless we measure it. It's all intuition at that point. Fix a problem unless we measure it. It's all intuition at that point. And when we start measuring, then we can start seeing what has the impact. So we've got all kinds of customers. I can't list all of them, but I'll just mention a few that have told us and have said it publicly. A company, KCM Cable, small wire harness manufacturer. A company, KCM Cable, small wire harness manufacturer, Corey, he said, hey, it took me 18 hours to do a quote like this. He's the guy quoting. He's the owner of the shop. So that we spend my weekend on this. And now he got his weekend back. Resco Electronics, some of you might know, they had a 30-day backlog. 30-day quoting backlog is now down to 2 to 3 days. Quote backlogs, right? They can respond to customers. S&Y, double their output. Same amount of folks. And there's many other stories, right? It does take factors. Usually we see results in 3 months. Certainly we see this kind of repeated results in 6 months. And our targets are 80% in cycle time reduction, meaning action, and 50% in your direct touch time. And we're confident that this is achievable. So 3 concrete things you can do when you go back to your shop on Monday. Some will be back on Friday. So the first, pull your last 20 RFQs. See if you can get any data. You don't have to start forward, but look at when that quote was received by your sales team and when it was delivered. By your sales team and when it was delivered. Everything else doesn't matter. It went into a sales inbox on the 1st of April, and it went out to the customer on the 24th. That's the measurements. And that's the deal that you don't end up losing because you took too long. I think you will see a lot when you look at that. Second, find where your most critical and single point of failure may be. Who is that person in the process that is the most critical in that process? And then look at what happens if they're gone for a week or longer, or they leave, right? And then third, pick one of the root causes that I shared with you, and I'm happy to share the slides. I think they'll be available afterwards. Pick one of them and fix it this quarter. These are fixable things if you spend time on it. We certainly can help you if you spend time on it. We certainly can help you if you're interested, or if you want to do it alone. We're happy to advise you on that, and just in terms of general feedback. Don't try to fix the entire process. It's hard to go from 3 weeks to 3 days. Back from members of the IAT, the WEMA IAT, or if you want feedback from Cable Tech, we are happy to provide that. So our vision and this is with the manufacturers, rich CAD data. Your smart quote engine process it instantaneously. You're immediately able to reply with accurate pricing, both in terms of materials and labor based on your equipment and your machines and your standards in your plant. And you reply back to your customer in hours, not weeks or days. And that's not science fiction. This is something we're working towards. We've got huge initiatives, both as an industry, WEMA, and companies like Cabletech. There are others that are working to support. But the important thing is, if you're not addressing it now, your competitors are addressing it, and you will be at a disadvantage because that's where the OEMs are moving to, and that's a competitive requirements are moving to, and that's a competitive requirements to respond in the same way and in the same standard. So you've got to choose, do I want to be a leader, or am I going to wait for my customers to compel me to catch up? For my customers to compel me to catch up. And before opening it up to questions, I do have a few plugs. First, on your table, we've got cards. On your table, we've got cards that are free wire TARDIS tooling search. Okay, it's an open website. You just need to register your name. You don't need to be a customer of Cabletech. You don't need to help with everyone. It's our contribution back to the industry. We spent years collecting data. It's not perfect, doesn't have every part that you might have, but it's got quite a lot. And feel free to use it. Feel free to look back. If anybody, you don't have to just take the pictures. We have cards that you can scan. You've out here in the purple hat behind me has these cards. Take it, have your team use it again, and give us feedback. We are here at EWTTE. This event is done by the organization called WEMA, Wire Harness Manufacturing Association. How many here are member of WEMA? Around half members. And so this is an important organization. It's our industry. Certainly, I wasn't a WEMA member all of my years in the industry, but now that I am, I can say it's a great organization. Gives us a lot of benefits. We're learning a lot from their experiences and best practices. There's a lot of important educational materials that the organization shares, connecting us with suppliers and then customers. And it's a great network, and even have built friendships around this industry. You know, common hardworking people solving similar challenges. If you're not a member, visit WEMA at their booth. I think and they do have discounts on their membership. Thank you. Any questions? Comments? Yes. The tool search does not have an API.